We often talk about the amazing diversity of life on Earth, but it's easy to forget about what's happening right under our feet.
Yeah, yeah. Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's this whole hidden kingdom down there, these intricate networks that can spread across an area so large it's hard to even grasp.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. A single fungal organism, just one, can stretch over an area as big as 1,800 football fields.
It's mind-boggling. That's the potential reach of some of these fungal mycelia, these underground webs that connect so much of life below the surface.
And it's not just about size. They play this absolutely crucial role in almost every ecosystem. I mean, we're talking about the foundation of so many food webs, the health of our forests, even the air we breathe.
So true. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in this deep dive. A real in-depth look at the incredible world of fungi, from their basic biology to their mind-blowing diversity, their evolutionary journey, and all the fascinating roles they play in our world.
I'm really excited to dig into this. We'll start by uncovering how fungi, although they're heterotrophs like us, have this unique method of feeding, unlike anything else in nature.
Right, they can't make their own food like plants do. They need to get it from somewhere else, but instead of eating, they absorb it. How does that even work?
Well, it all comes down to these powerful enzymes they produce. They secrete these enzymes, called hydrolytic enzymes, out into their environment.
So it's like they send out these chemical scouts to break down food before they actually eat it.
Exactly. Think of it like predigestion happening outside their bodies. These enzymes break down complex organic matter, things like wood, leaves, even dead animals, into much simpler molecules that they can then absorb.
So they essentially turn their surroundings into this nutrient soup that they can just soak up.
Precisely. And this ability to break down so many different things, that's what makes them such effective decomposers, these essential recyclers that keep ecosystems running.
Now, when we think about a fungus, it's not like picturing a plant with roots and leaves or an animal with organs. How is the body of a fungus actually structured?
Well, they come in a couple of main forms, the most common being these multicellular filaments called hyphae. These hyphae branch out and intertwine, forming a network called the mycelium. It's the mycelium that does most of the heavy lifting when it comes to nutrient absorption.
And the mycelium, that's what can spread across those huge areas that we talked about.
Exactly. It's all about maximizing surface area, making contact with as much of their surroundings as possible to absorb nutrients.
The book has this incredible example. Just imagine a little cube of soil, maybe the size of a sugar cube. It can contain almost a kilometer of hyphae packed in there, which creates a surface area hundreds of times larger than the cube itself.
It's amazing, isn't it? And all that surface area, that's what allows them to be so efficient at extracting nutrients from the soil, from dead wood, wherever they happen to be growing.
Now, not all fungi are made up of these hyphae. There are also yeasts, right? And those are single-celled.
That's right. Yeasts are kind of the rebels of the fungal kingdom, opting for a simpler, single-celled existence. They tend to thrive in environments that are rich in nutrients, places like the surface of fruits, or even in the sap of trees.
And some fungi can even switch between these two forms, the hyphae and the yeast.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Some species can transition between a multicellular filamentous form and a single-celled yeast form, depending on environmental conditions.
It's like they have this adaptable toolbox for different situations. Now, going back to those hyphae, they're not all just simple tubes. The chapter mentions some really specialized types of hyphae.
Oh, for sure. Some fungi have evolved some incredible adaptations for getting their nutrients, even from living organisms.
Talk about taking you are what you eat to a whole new level. Can you give us an example?
Well, there's this soil fungus called arthrobotrys, which actually sets traps to catch tiny roundworms called nematodes. They have these loop-shaped hyphae that can constrict incredibly fast, ensnaring the nematode.
Wow, so it's like a microscopic lasso. And once they catch their prey,
The hyphae penetrate the nematode's body and digest it from the inside out. Not the most pleasant way to go.
it's like something out of a horror movie, only on a microscopic scale.
Right. And then you have haustoria, these specialized hyphae that some parasitic fungi use. They penetrate the cell walls of plants, allowing them to siphon off nutrients without actually killing the host plant.
Sneaky.
Yeah, it's a very subtle form of parasitism. And then there are the arbuscules, which are these highly branched hyphae that are essential for a really important type of symbiotic relationship called mycorrhiza.
Mycorrhiza, that's fungus roots, right? We haven't heard about how beneficial they are for plants.
They're incredibly important. These arbuscules, instead of just penetrating the plant's cell wall, they kind of push their way in, invaginating the plant's cell membrane. And this creates a huge surface area for exchanging nutrients.
So it's a very intimate connection between the fungus and the plant. What's the benefit for each partner?
It's a beautiful example of mutualism, a win-win situation for both. The fungus, with its extensive mycelium spreading through the soil, is incredibly efficient at absorbing certain minerals, especially phosphate, which can be hard for plants to access. So the fungus provides the plant with these essential minerals, and in return, the plant, being photosynthetic, provides the fungus with sugars and other organic compounds that it needs for energy and growth.
So they're trading essential resources, helping each other thrive. It's like a perfect partnership.
Exactly. And mycorrhiza are incredibly common. Most vascular plants, the ones with roots and stems, form these associations. They're crucial for the health of forests, grasslands, pretty much any terrestrial ecosystem you can think of.
The book even mentions that foresters will introduce specific mycorrhizal fungi to the soil when they're planting trees, just to give them a better chance of survival.
Absolutely. It makes a huge difference. It's like giving them a head start. And finally, before we move on from fungal nutrition, we should talk about spores. These are tiny reproductive units, essential for fungi to spread and colonize new environments.
Right, they're kind of like the seeds of the fungal world, spreading through the air, water, or even hitching rides on animals. And when they land in a suitable spot, they can germinate and grow into a whole new mycelium.
Exactly. That's how that melon in your fridge gets covered in mold so quickly, even though it seems sealed up tight. Those spores are everywhere.
Okay, so we've seen how they eat, we've seen how they spread. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of how fungi make more of themselves. And it's not always as straightforward as you might think, right?
Yeah.
They've got these fascinating and complex life cycles.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Fungi are masters of reproduction, and they can do it in a couple of different ways, sexually and asexually. And as you said, it can get pretty intricate.
Let's start with sexual reproduction. What kicks off that whole process?
Well, it often begins with a form of chemical communication, kind of like sending out invitations to a party. Different fungal individuals, they release signaling molecules called pheromones.
So they're basically advertising their availability.
Yeah, you could say that. And these pheromones, they're specific to different mating types, ensuring that only compatible individuals can, well, get together.
That's a clever way to promote genetic diversity, making sure they're not just mating with themselves. And when these compatible mycelia detect each other's pheromones, what happens next?
Well, their hyphae start to grow towards each other, drawn in by these chemical signals, and eventually those hyphae fuse.
So they made contact. Now it's time to combine their genetic material and make some offspring.
Not so fast. It's not quite that simple. The first step is the fusion of the cytoplasm, the gooey stuff inside the cells. This is called plasmogamy. But here's the interesting part. The nuclei from each parent, they don't immediately fuse. They can actually coexist within the same mycelium for a while. This creates what's called a heterokaryon.
Heterokaryon, that means different nuclei, right?
Precisely. So you've got this single mycelium, but it contains two genetically distinct sets of nuclei. And in some cases, these nuclei will pair up, one from each parent, forming what's called a deuterion.
A dekaryon, two nuclei. So this is a bit different from how we usually think about sexual reproduction. There's this delayed fusion of the nuclei.
Exactly. It's unique to fungi, and this eukaryotic stage, it can last for quite a while. Eventually, though, triggered by environmental cues, the nuclei finally fuse. This is called karyogamy, and it forms a diploid zygote.
So karyogamy, that's the moment when you finally have a single nucleus with two sets of chromosomes.
Right. But this diploid stage, for most fungi, it's very short-lived. Almost immediately, the zygote undergoes meiosis, which is a type of cell division that reduces the chromosome number back down to one set, and this produces the sexual spores.
Okay, so through this whole elaborate dance of plasmogamy, karyogamy, and meiosis, they generate these genetically diverse spores that can then go on to spread and colonize new areas.
Exactly. And this whole process, it's a major driver of genetic diversity in fungi, giving them the ability to adapt and evolve.
Now, what about asexual reproduction? It seems like a much simpler way to make more fungi.
Oh, for sure. A lot of fungi can reproduce asexually. In fact, it's how many of them spread so quickly, they simply produce spores through mitosis, regular cell division.
So it's just cloning themselves, creating genetically identical copies.
Yep. And this is how those molds on your bread or fruit appear so rapidly. They can pump out huge numbers of these asexual spores.
And yeasts. They also reproduce asexually.
Oh, yeah. Yeasts often just divide in half or they bud off little daughter cells. It's pretty straightforward.
And some fungi can even do both, right? They can reproduce sexually and asexually.
Yeah, that's right. They have the flexibility to choose the best strategy depending on the situation.
That's fascinating. Now, there are some fungi, the Deuteromycetes, that we haven't observed reproducing sexually at all. What's the story there?
Well, the Deuteromycetes were traditionally kind of a miscellaneous group, the fungi that we don't know how they reproduce sexually. But with modern DNA techniques, we're getting much better at figuring out where they fit on the fungal family tree.
So we can analyze their genes and compare them to fungi, where we do know their sexual stages.
Exactly. And often we can reclassify them and put them in the correct phylum.
Okay, so it's an evolving understanding of fungal classification. We're still piecing together the puzzle. Now, let's zoom out a bit and talk about the big picture, the evolutionary history of fungi. The chapter traces their ancestry back to this single-celled aquatic protist with a flagellum. Quite a journey to get to the diverse kingdom we see today.
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing to think about the billions of years of evolution that have shaped the fungi we see all around us. And yeah, the evidence points to this flagellated ancestor that they share with animals.
Wait, fungi are related to animals. That's not something you hear every day.
Yeah, it's one of those things that kind of blows your mind when you first learn about it, but the molecular data is very clear. Fungi and animals are more closely related to each other than either is to plants.
So what's the evidence for this shared ancestry, besides the DNA?
Well, if you look at some of the more ancient lineages of fungi, like the cryptomycetes and the chytrids, they still have flagellated spores, the zoospores we talked about earlier.
Right, they need that flagellum to swim around in water.
Exactly. And if you look at the protists that are considered to be the closest relatives of animals and fungi, many of them also have flagella. So it all points to this flagellated ancestor that lived in water.
So together, fungi, animals, and these protists, they form a group called the opisthocons, right?
You got it. And that name, opistocont, it actually refers to the position of the flagellum. It's located at the rear end of the cell, pushing it forward.
It's amazing to think about this single-celled organism swimming around in ancient oceans and how it eventually gave rise to the diversity of both fungi and animals.
It's a truly incredible story of evolution, and one of the really interesting things is that multicellularity, that defining feature of most fungi and all animals, it seems to have evolved independently in these two lineages.
So they didn't inherit multicellularity from their common ancestor. They each figured it out on their own.
That's right. And that's a really key insight. It shows that complex life, it can arise through different evolutionary pathways.
Now, when did this split between fungi and animals happen? The chapter mentions some pretty ancient dates.
Yeah, estimates based on molecular clock analysis suggest that the common ancestor of animals and fungi lived over 1 billion years ago. And there's some evidence suggesting that fungi might have been among the first organisms to colonize land, even before plants.
Really? Fungi were the pioneers of terrestrial life.
It's a possibility. There are some fossil claims pushing back almost 1.5 billion years, but those are still debated. The oldest widely accepted fossils of definitely fungal origin are around 440 million years old.
So even those are incredibly ancient.
Oh, absolutely. And there's other evidence based on the chemistry of ancient soils that hints at fungi being present on land even earlier, maybe as far back as 505 million years ago.
So picture this. A world without trees, without flowering plants, just this barren landscape, maybe with some algae and bacteria and fungi, breaking down whatever organic matter they could find.
Exactly. They might have been part of this green slime that covered the early Earth, paving the way for plants to eventually evolve and diversify. And speaking of plants, the chapter talks about this crucial early partnership that developed between fungi and the first land plants.
Right, the mycorrhizae, these fungus roots.
Absolutely. We see evidence of these mycorrhizal-like associations in fossils of early land plants, suggesting that this partnership was essential right from the get-go.
It makes sense. Those early plants didn't have the same root systems we see today, so having these fungal partners would have been crucial for helping them get the nutrients they needed.
Exactly. And there's even molecular evidence supporting this ancient origin of mycorrhiza. Researchers have found these genes called sym-genes that are essential for forming mycorrhizae in modern plants, and these same genes are present in even the most primitive land plants, like liverworts. It suggests that this ability to form partnerships with fungi, it's been around for hundreds of millions of years.
It's an amazing story of coevolution, how these two kingdoms have been shaping each other's destinies for so long. Okay, so we've got this ancient origin, this early partnership with plants. Now let's fast forward a bit and talk about the diversity of fungi we see today. The chapter dives into a whole array of different lineages.
Yeah, and our understanding of how these lineages are related to each other, it's changed a lot in recent years thanks to DNA sequencing and other molecular techniques. We're able to look at their genes and see how they're connected in ways we couldn't before.
So we're getting a much clearer picture of the fungal family tree.
Exactly. And some of the traditional groupings have actually been abandoned because they turned out to be incorrect based on the genetic data. It's like we're redrawing the map of the fungal kingdom.
And the chapter presents this updated view of the relationships between the major fungal groups, showing this incredible diversity, with groups like the cryptomycetes and microsporidians branching off early, and then leading to the more familiar groups like the ascomycetes and basidiomycetes, the ones that produce mushrooms and other large fruiting bodies.
Right. And even with all the species we've identified so far, we're only scratching the surface. Some estimates suggest there could be millions of fungal species out there that we haven't even discovered yet. It's really exciting. There's still so much to learn.
Let's dive into some of these key lineages, starting with the cryptomycetes. These are a relatively recently discovered group, aren't they?
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago that we even knew they existed. But now, based on genetic studies, we're realizing that they're actually quite diverse and widespread. We've found them in all sorts of aquatic and terrestrial environments.
And they have some pretty interesting characteristics, right? They have these flagellated spores connecting them back to those early aquatic ancestors.
Exactly. And they also have those chitin-rich cell walls, that signature feature of fungi. Many of the cryptomycetes we've identified so far are parasites of protists and other fungi.
So even at the base of the fungal tree, we're already seeing this diversity of lifestyles.
Absolutely. And then there are the microsporidians, which are all obligate parasites. They can only survive and reproduce inside the cells of their hosts.
So they're totally dependent on their hosts for survival.
That's right. And they've evolved some pretty specialized adaptations to live this parasitic lifestyle. They have these unique harpoon-like structures they use to pierce host cells and inject themselves inside.
It's like something out of a science fiction movie. And they infect a wide range of hosts, right?
Oh, yeah. Everything from protists to animals, even humans. And some of them can be pretty nasty pathogens, causing serious diseases.
The book mentions Nosema ceranae, which has been linked to colony collapse disorder in honeybees.
Right, and that's a huge concern, considering how important bees are for pollination. It really highlights the impact these tiny parasites can have.
Next up are the chytrids. These seem to have a bit more variety in their lifestyles compared to the microsporidians.
Definitely. We see chytrids that are decomposers, parasites, and even mutualists. They're found in all sorts of aquatic environments, from lakes and rivers to even hydrothermal vents in the deep ocean.
And they're another group that retains those flagellated spores, those zoospores.
Right, another link back to those aquatic ancestors. And some chytrids, sadly, have become infamous for their role in amphibian decline.
The book mentions Batrachochytrium dendrobatidis, which causes this devastating skin infection in frogs.
Yeah, it's been a major factor in the decline of many amphibian populations worldwide.
It's a stark reminder of the impact fungi can have, even on a global scale.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to the Zupagomycetes, these guys seem to be mostly associated with animals.
That's right. Most Zupagomycetes are parasites or symbionts of animals. They often have these really interesting and intricate relationships with their hosts.
Like that fly death fungus the book talks about, Entomophthora muscat.
Yeah, that's a classic example. The fungus infects a fly, and as it grows, it starts to manipulate the fly's behavior, driving it to climb up high and then die in a position that's perfect for dispersing the fungal spores.
It's like something out of a zombie movie.
It's pretty wild. And then we have the Mucoromyces, a group that includes some familiar faces, those molds that pop up on our bread and fruit.
Oh yeah, the ones we try to avoid.
Exactly. But this group is more than just mold. They're important decomposers in the environment, and some are even mycorrhizal fungi, forming beneficial relationships with plants.
So they have this dual role, both breaking down dead stuff and helping living plants thrive.
That's right. And the book mentions the example of Pilobolus, the dung cannon fungus, which has this amazing ability to shoot its sporangia towards light, helping it disperse to new areas.
Okay, so we've covered these early diverging lineages of fungi. Now let's talk about the big ones, the ascomycetes and the basidiomycetes. These are the groups that include many of the fungi we're most familiar with.
Exactly. The ascomycetes, also known as sac fungi, are incredibly diverse. They include everything from single-celled yeasts to the morels and truffles that people love to eat. And many of them form these really important symbiotic relationships, like the lichens we see growing on rocks and trees.
Right, lichens are those fascinating partnerships between a fungus and an alga or a cyanobacterium.
Exactly. They can survive in some of the harshest environments on Earth. And Ascomycetes also include many important decomposers and some pretty serious plant pathogens. Think about Dutch elm disease that's caused by an Ascomycete fungus.
So they can be both friends and foes of plants. And their sexual reproduction is pretty fascinating, involving this extended dikaryotic stage.
Right, that's a key characteristic of both Ascomycetes and Basidiomycetes. They have this delayed fusion of nuclei, creating these dikaryotic hyphae that can grow and spread for quite a while before the nuclei finally fuse and form the sexual spores.
And then we have the Basidiomycetes, the club fungi. This is the group that includes the mushrooms we're all familiar with, right?
Exactly. Those iconic mushrooms with caps and gills, those are Basidiomycetes. But this group also includes puffballs, shelf fungi, and bracket fungi, as well as some really important mycorrhizal fungi and some pretty destructive plant parasites.
So another group with a lot of ecological diversity.
Definitely. And they also have that characteristic extended dikaryotic stage in their life cycle. But one of the things that really sets Basidiomycetes apart is their ability to produce these elaborate and often very large fruiting bodies, the mushrooms.
And those mushrooms, they're really just the tip of the iceberg, right? The main body of the fungus, the mycelium, is hidden underground.
Exactly. The mushroom is just the reproductive structure designed to produce and disperse spores.
It's amazing to think about the complexity of these organisms, how they can grow and thrive in so many different environments, and the incredible variety of forms they take.
It truly is. And they're not just fascinating from a biological perspective, they also play these incredibly important roles in our world. We've already talked about mycorrhizae and their role in plant health, but fungi are also essential decomposers, breaking down dead organic matter and recycling nutrients back into the ecosystem.
Right, without fungi, the world would be piled high with dead trees, leaves, and everything else.
Exactly. They're nature's recyclers, essential for the flow of energy and nutrients through ecosystems.
And they also play a really important role in human society, don't they? We use them for food, medicine, even in biotechnology.
Oh, absolutely. Think about yeast. It's essential for making bread and beer. And we get antibiotics like penicillin from fungi. And increasingly, we're exploring the potential of fungi for bioremediation, cleaning up pollutants in the environment.
It's amazing to think about all the ways we depend on these often overlooked organisms.
Yeah, they're truly essential for life as we know it. And as we continue to learn more about them, who knows what other amazing discoveries we'll make.
Well, that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into the world of fungi. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a whole new level of appreciation for these incredible organisms.
Me too. They're truly fascinating and essential parts of our world. And I think the more we learn about them, the more we realize how much we still don't know.
So true. And with that, we'll leave our listeners with a thought to ponder. Considering how ancient and widespread fungi are, and how interconnected they are with so much of life on Earth, what might we learn about the history of our planet, about evolution, about ourselves, if we were to look at the world through a fungal lens?
It's a fascinating question, and I think the answer might surprise us.
Thanks for joining us on this fungal adventure, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the natural world.
See you then.